Start cutting! HOA Karen barked, her voice amplified by pure, unadulterated suburban fury, echoing across what was rapidly becoming the crime scene of my front yard. I stood there frozen, watching in horror as two burly figures in hard hats revved their chainsaws, their blades glinting menacingly in the morning sun, poised to attack my tree, my magnificent decades-old oak tree. "Karen, please, stop this! You can't do this!" I pleaded, my voice cracking with a mixture of rage and desperation. "It's a healthy tree. It's part of my home. You can't just chop it down because you don't like the way it looks." HOA Karen, Mildred McMillan, to use her full, terrifying title, simply smirked, a thin, cruel line that barely qualified as human. Rule 27, subsection J, paragraph 5, Miss... She paused, that deliberate, dehumanizing pause. "Jenkins. Aesthetic harmony. Neighborhood uniformity. Compliance is mandatory." And she gestured towards the lumberjacks with a dismissive wave of her perfectly manicured hand. "Compliance is now being enforced. With chainsaws. On my beloved oak tree. The tree that had stood sentinel in my yard for longer than I'd lived in Oakwood Estates, its branches providing shade in the summer, its leaves a glorious tapestry of color in the fall, its presence a constant, comforting anchor in the otherwise beige and predictable landscape of suburban life. And now, HOA Karen, in her infinite rule-obsessed wisdom, had decided it was aesthetically non-harmonious, a blight upon the uniformity of Oakwood Estates, and therefore deserving of chainsaw execution. The roar of the chainsaws ripped through the morning air, drowning out my protests, drowning out reason, drowning out any semblance of suburban sanity. I watched, helpless, as the blades bit into the thick trunk of my oak tree, sawdust flying, the scent of freshly cut wood mingling with the acrid stench of injustice. My beautiful tree, the heart of my yard, was being murdered by HOA Karen. In the name of aesthetic harmony. It was beyond ridiculous. It was an act of suburban treeside. "You'll regret this, Karen," I shouted over the din of the chainsaws, my voice raw with fury. "You'll regret ever touching my tree. This isn't over." HOA Karen just laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that grated on my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. "Regret, Miss Jenkins? Compliance is the only thing you'll regret not embracing sooner. And as for not being over, Rule 27, subsection J, paragraph 5 is quite clear. The tree is non-compliant. The tree is coming down. End of discussion." She turned her back on me, her power suits stiff with self-righteousness, and surveyed the chainsaw carnage with a smugly satisfied expression. End of discussion? Hardly. For HOA Karen, maybe. But for me, this was just the beginning. The beginning of a suburban revenge plot, fueled by righteous anger, a deep love for my fallen oak tree, and a burning desire to make HOA Karen Mildred McMillan pay for her chainsaw betrayal. And I had just the buzzworthy plan in mind. The sight of my majestic oak crashing to the ground, the sickening thud as it hit the earth, the gaping hole left in my yard and in my heart, it fueled a rage in me that I hadn't known I possessed. HOA Karen had crossed a line. She hadn't just enforced a petty rule. She'd destroyed something beautiful, something irreplaceable, something that mattered. And for that, she would pay. Not with angry words or legal battles, though I was definitely consulting a lawyer later, but with something far more creatively disruptive. I paced my now treeless yard, brainstorming revenge scenarios. Vandalism? Too obvious, too illegal, not my style. Passive-aggressive lawn gnome placement? Amusing but not impactful enough for treeside. No, I needed something subtler, more insidious. Something that would truly get under HOA Karen's perfectly coiffed skin, something that would disrupt her precious aesthetic harmony in a way that was both satisfyingly chaotic and deniably accidental. And then it hit me. Bees. Bees were the answer. Bees were nature's tiny, buzzing agents of chaos, perfectly capable of disrupting suburban tranquility and, crucially, attracted to flowers. And what did HOA Karen have in abundance? A meticulously manicured, prize-winning, utterly sterile flower garden, devoid of any actual life or joy but overflowing with perfectly sculpted, perfectly beige blooms. Perfect, just perfect. The plan started to form in my mind, buzzing with possibilities like a beehive. Accidental beehive placement, Operation Bee Vengenda. It was audacious, it was slightly ridiculous, it was definitely a little bit evil, and it was exactly what HOA Karen deserved. First, research. I spent hours online researching bees, beehives, bee-attracting plants, and local beekeeping regulations. Crucially, Oakwood Estates HOA rules were silent on beekeeping. Loophole. I learned about different types of bees, their behavior, their defensive instincts. I discovered that certain plants were particularly irresistible to bees, attracting swarms from miles around. And I learned that bees, while generally peaceful, could become agitated if their hive was disturbed. Interesting. Very interesting. Next, acquisition. I ordered a beginner beekeeping kit online. Hive box, frames, protective gear, the whole shebang. For educational purposes, I told my increasingly curious neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, who raised a skeptical eyebrow but didn't press further. I also acquired a starter colony of Italian honeybees from a local beekeeper, a surprisingly friendly and helpful fellow who seemed vaguely amused by my suburban beekeeping ambitions. And of course, the plants. Oh, the plants. I went on a bee-attracting plant shopping spree, filling my car with lavender, bee balm, sunflowers, clover, anything and everything that promised to create a veritable pollinator paradise. Right next door to HOA Karen's sterile beige wasteland. Finally, execution. Under the cover of darkness, armed with my beekeeping suit, a headlamp, and a slightly nervous heart, I carefully assembled the beehive box, placed it discreetly near the property line, bordering HOA Karen's yard, and gently installed the bee colony. The bees, initially disoriented, quickly settled into their new home, a low hum of buzzing filling the night air. Operation Bee Vengenda was officially live. Now all that was left to do was wait and watch, and maybe, just maybe, enjoy a little bit of sweet bee-infused suburban justice, and maybe, just maybe, plant a whole lot more bee-attracting flowers, just to encourage the bees to stay put. And maybe, just maybe, watch HOA Karen Mildred McMillan's perfectly manicured world descend into a buzzing, chaotic, and utterly hilarious state of besieged pandemonium. The bees were in place, the flowers were blooming, the stage was set. Let the Bee Vengenda begin. The first sign of Bee Vengenda's success was subtle, almost imperceptible. A slight increase in buzzing activity in HOA Karen's yard. A few bees venturing beyond my pollinator paradise, exploring the less pollinator-friendly landscape next door. Nothing alarming, nothing overtly chaotic, just a few bees, buzzing around her perfectly sculpted topiaries, landing briefly on her beige petunias, generally just being bees. But for HOA Karen, even a few bees were apparently a suburban apocalypse. The emails started almost immediately. All caps, multiple exclamation points, subject line screaming bee infestation, and immediate action required. Miss Jenkins, the first email shrieked, I have observed bees in my yard. This is unacceptable. Your pollinator garden is attracting vermin. HOA Rule 32, subsection Q, paragraph 12 clearly states, residents are responsible for preventing pest infestations. Immediate removal of bee-attracting vegetation is required. And, she added in a final, venomous flourish, I suspect this is deliberate. Deliberate? Why, Mildred? Whatever do you mean? Me? Deliberately attracting bees to my yard with perfectly legal, perfectly HOA-approved flowering plants? Preposterous. I replied with a picture of a butterfly on a bee balm flower and a polite, utterly innocent email. Dear Mrs. McMillan, so sorry to hear you're experiencing some buzzing activity. My pollinator garden is simply intended to support local bee populations as responsible environmental stewardship. Perhaps a citronella candle would help. Passive-aggressive innocence at its finest. The emails escalated. The bees, emboldened by the abundance of pollen and nectar in my yard, and perhaps, just perhaps, a slight breeze carrying the scent of my bee-attracting blooms directly into HOA Karen's yard, became more adventurous. More bees appeared in her yard, more buzzing, more panic from HOA Karen. She started patrolling the property line, armed with a can of industrial-strength insecticide, spraying indiscriminately at any bee that dared to venture into her beige domain. This, of course, was not only environmentally disastrous, but also deeply irritating to the bees. Agitated bees, as I had learned in my bee research, were less docile, less inclined to politely buzz about their business, more inclined to defend their territory. And their territory, increasingly, seemed to include HOA Karen's prize-winning petunias. The buzzing intensified, the emails became more frantic. The violation notices started again, this time for creating a bee nuisance, attracting dangerous insects, and violating neighborhood tranquility with excessive buzzing sounds. The fines naturally escalated daily. HOA Karen was losing it, and Oakwood Estates, or at least the more amusement-inclined residents of Oakwood Estates, were starting to notice and enjoy the show. Old Mr. Henderson, chuckling, left a jar of honey on my doorstep, labeled "From the Oakwood Estates Pollinator Defense League." Mrs. Rodriguez, winking, suggested I start selling HOA Karen honey at the local farmers market. Young Mr. Davis naturally created a bee-cam livestream, broadcasting the buzzing activity in my yard and, crucially, the increasingly frantic activity in HOA Karen's yard to the internet, complete with bee-themed emojis and a jaunty ukulele-driven soundtrack. Bee Vengenda was going viral. And HOA Karen Mildred McMillan? She was about to get stung. Metaphorically, of course. Though if the bees kept getting more agitated, well, who knew what might happen? Accidents happen after all, especially in suburbia, especially when HOA Karens wage war on trees and attract the attention of the local bee population. The climax of Bee Vengenda arrived, as all good climaxes should, with a perfectly timed, utterly chaotic, and hilariously public incident. It was the annual Oakwood Estates Garden Club competition judging day. HOA Karen naturally was the reigning champion, her sterile, beige, rule-compliant garden the perennial gold medalist. And this year she was determined to win again, to reaffirm her aesthetic dominance, to, well, probably to gloat about her tree-chopping victory and further solidify her HOA Karen reign. The judges arrived mid-morning, a gaggle of impeccably dressed garden club types, clipboards in hand, ready to bestow their coveted blue ribbons upon the most aesthetically harmonious yards in Oakwood Estates. HOA Karen, beaming with smug confidence, greeted them at the entrance to her prize-winning garden, ready to bask in the glory of her beige blooms and perfectly sculpted topiaries. And then the bees attacked. Not in a coordinated military-style bee assault, mind you, but in a more organic, chaotic, and utterly hilarious fashion. A sudden gust of wind, perhaps, or maybe just the sheer, overwhelming floral blandness of HOA Karen's garden, finally driving them over the edge. Whatever the cause, a swarm of bees, seemingly emanating from my pollinator paradise next door, descended upon HOA Karen's yard. Not just a few bees. A swarm. A buzzing, swirling, chaotic cloud of bees, descending upon her prize-winning petunias, her perfectly sculpted topiaries, and, most importantly, upon HOA Karen herself. Chaos erupted. The garden club judges, impeccably dressed and utterly unprepared for a bee invasion, shrieked and scattered, clipboards flying, blue ribbons abandoned. HOA Karen, initially frozen in disbelief, let out a blood-curdling scream as a bee, or perhaps several bees, decided her perfectly coiffed blonde hair looked like a particularly inviting landing pad. She flailed, she swatted, she danced a bizarre, bee-induced jig of suburban panic, her screams echoing across Oakwood Estates. Her power suit, once a symbol of HOA authority, was now a flapping, bee-attracting mess. Her perfectly sculpted hair, once a testament to suburban control, was now a buzzing, chaotic beehive in training. It was glorious. Bee Vengenda, fully, hilariously, and utterly satisfyingly achieved. The Beecam livestream naturally captured every glorious, chaotic, bee-infused moment, broadcasting HOA Karen's public humiliation to the world, complete with bee-themed emojis, ukulele music, and a running commentary from young Mr. Davis that was, frankly, comedic gold. And there she goes, folks. HOA Karen in full bee-vasion mode. Look at that form. The flailing, the screaming, truly a performance for the ages. And, oh my goodness, is that a blue ribbon being abandoned? Could this be a bee-related disqualification? Stay tuned, folks. This is Oakwood Estates Garden Club competition history in the making. The bees, having made their point, and perhaps sampled HOA Karen's prize-winning petunias, proving even beige blooms have some pollinator value, eventually dispersed, leaving behind a scene of utter suburban disarray. Scattered judges, abandoned clipboards, trampled petunias, and a thoroughly humiliated, bee-stung, and utterly defeated HOA Karen Mildred McMillan. The Oakwood Estates Garden Club competition? Cancelled. HOA Karen's reign of aesthetic terror officially over, and all thanks to a few thousand very angry, very effective, and utterly accidental bees. The aftermath of the bee-pocalypse, as it was quickly dubbed, was sweet. Not just metaphorically sweet, in a justice-served, HOA Karen humiliated kind of way, but literally sweet, honey sweet. Because, as it turned out, my accidental beehive placement had been remarkably successful. The bees, thriving in my pollinator paradise, had produced a veritable bounty of delicious golden honey. Oakwood Estates Rebellion honey, we called it. And it was selling like, well, like honey at a bee-themed rebellion rally. HOA Karen, predictably, retreated into her house, a self-imposed exile. Her white SUV remained parked in her driveway, presumably bee-free, but definitely carrying the lingering scent of public humiliation. The emails stopped, the violation notices ceased. She became a suburban recluse, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones at neighborhood barbecues. Remember HOA Karen? The one who got chased by bees? Yeah. Don't be like HOA Karen. The Oakwood Estates HOA, under the newly liberated leadership of Brenda McMillan, who, bless her, had a surprisingly good sense of humor about the whole bee incident, underwent a transformation. Rule 27, subsection J, paragraph 5, was quietly revised to be a bit less aesthetically rigid. New, more pollinator-friendly landscaping guidelines were introduced, and the annual garden club competition replaced with a Oakwood Estates Pollinator Paradise Festival, celebrating bees, butterflies, and all things naturally beautiful and slightly disorderly. As for me, I became the unlikely hero of Oakwood Estates, the bee venger, the woman who stood up to HOA Karen and won, not with angry words or legal battles, but with bees. My yard, once threatened with aesthetic eradication, became a community gathering place, a buzzing, blooming symbol of suburban rebellion and nature's sweet, chaotic triumph over rule-obsessed tyranny. And every time I walked past HOA Karen's beige, bee-free, and utterly deserted yard, I couldn't help but smile. Bee vengenda, indeed. Justice, honey-sweet and satisfyingly stinging, had been served, and Oakwood Estates, finally, was buzzing with a new kind of energy. A rebellious, joyful, and gloriously naturally chaotic energy, all thanks to a few thousand very busy, very effective, and early accidental bees.